My name is Gene Harmon. I'm currently the Vice President of Strategy and Marketing at Webco. Started in Webco in 1985. I left for a little while, and then I came back. Been back for a long time, so never really left. At the time I was gone, my best friend, my family, everybody worked here.
So we're going to continue on with our series about Beyond Webco, which basically is people who do things outside of Webco. We want to know what kind of makes you tick. What kind of hobbies and interests do you have outside of work?
It's funny you said Beyond Webco.
Right.
I think you kind of set me up for that. I'm a beekeeper. I do lots of different things for fun, but one of the things I do is I keep bees. Bees always kind of fascinate me a little bit. It was, I had a gentleman that I worked with at one point in time, and I saw he was teaching a class, didn't even know he kept bees, and so I ran into him at Home Depot one time, and I said, hey, his name was Lee. I said, Lee, I didn't realize you keep bees. I said, I've always thought that's kind of interesting. He goes, if you want to learn how to keep them, he goes, I'll bring a hive and put it at your house. And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. And so he brought a hive. It was his hive. We put it down by my pond. And then he spent a year saying, here's what you check, here's what you look at, here's what you do that. And in a year, he gave me half the honey that came off the hive, which was pretty cool. So the next year, he had to move. He lived not too far from where I lived at, and he asked me if I wanted to buy his hives. So I said, sure. So that was over 10 years ago. I've got about 7 hives right now, and that's probably the maximum number of hives I could have for the area. If I had 11 or 12 or 13 hives, I probably wouldn't get any more honey than I'm getting now with 7. I'd probably get the same amount with 5, to be honest with you.
So tell me a little bit about the process that you go through from when does a bee season start, and how do you facilitate that process?
So as soon as you come out of winter, okay, you cross your fingers and you hope that your bees survive the winter, right? If it's really cold, it's really long, maybe extremely wet, sometimes even, that can really be hard on those hives. So sometimes hives will starve. Sometimes the bees in it will gradually die off, and they basically get together and kind of keep each other warm, keep the queen warm for sure. They got to keep the hive like 98 degrees year round inside that hive. And so hopefully they survive the spring. It starts to warm up, you start to see pollen and stuff starts to become green, the bees start to get really active, we start bringing in pollen. So bringing in pollen, that's kind of a trigger for the queen and for the hive to start laying eggs, right? And it's called broods. They create brood because what they're trying to do is build up their numbers in the hive because of the winter it really brought it down to a really minimal amount. It's that whenever the nectar starts to flow later in the spring and early summer, they're able to go collect that and bring it in and store it for the next winter. So really bees at some point in time really want to swarm. A swarm is where about the queen decides that they've taken up the space and they want to create another hive. She'll take about half the bees and she'll leave and go find another hollowed out tree trunk or somewhere in order to be able to create another hive. And she'll leave behind enough eggs so that they can grow their own queen. Once that queen's hatched, then it'll go out and it'll mate. It'll come back, and then once it's mated one time, it'll come back. But she'll never go out of the hive again. She'll leave the hive once for a mating flight. She'll come back, and then she'll lay all summer long. And once you kind of get out of spring, hopefully the hives could have as many as 50 or 60,000 bees within a single hive. And that's when the nectar starts to flow. They'll start building comb. If they need to build comb, they'll start bringing in nectar, which will eventually become honey. And every hive is made up of 3 different types of bees. There's one queen. Every other bee in the hive is either a drone, which is a male, and all males do are eat and then go out and wait for a queen to be mated. Once they mate, they pass away, they die. Anyway, then that evening they go back and they'll stay in the hive and they'll eat, and they'll just do that every day. The third type of bee is a worker bee. They're all females. Anyway, those are the ones that do all the different types of activities in a hive, including collecting nectar for honey.
You've got everything set up. The bees have it's spring, they've kind of went and got out and collected the pollen, brought it back. What's the next step in the process? So
in nature, they have a tree trunk or some hollowed out area in which that they have a hive. So they build up that, and once they get bees and they get plenty of bees there, they'll swarm, right? And then the bees that are left will fill that up so they have enough food to make it through the next winter. So as a beekeeper, what you want to do is you want to collect honey, right? You just keep adding boxes, on top of boxes, so that the hive feels like it's got plenty of room for all the bees that are in the hive. You'll have 2 boxes that are really the brood boxes. That's kind of what you're going to leave for the queen and the bees that are there to be able to survive the next winter. So you don't really touch the bottom 2 boxes. Everything above that's called a super. That's the stuff that as a beekeeper you got to take and harvest and keep for yourself. I keep an eye on it during the spring, and you start to see as the hive starts to grow, you start adding boxes. And if you're not careful, if you don't keep an eye on that, then you'll have a hive swarm, and all of a sudden you're trying to collect honey, and half the bees that you were going to rely on to bring nectar into the hive are gone. So I'm keeping an eye on it all summer long, right? Spring and summer, making sure we have plenty of space. Well, for me and where I live out on Keystone Lake, really that middle part of June, that's when you can make some honey, right? Or they'll make some honey. So really in about 2 or 3 weeks, about everything that I get to be able to keep, vast majority of that comes on right there in the middle of June. So I try to manage my hives so that I've got the maximum number of bees and plenty of space and comb in there, so that whenever that hits, those guys have got plenty of workers, plenty of space.
So walk me through, once you go out there, you're checking the hives, you're ready to start harvesting the honey. Walk me through a little bit of that process.
Yeah, well, it's easier now than it was when I started, because I kind of learned a little bit more about what I should and shouldn't do for the most part. Like you got a super on, right? Which is you got those frames that got capped honey. Taking nectar, it's been converted into honey. It's dehydrated now to the right moisture content. They'll cap it. They'll put wax on top of it, and then you can look in there and see those are capped. As soon as those are capped, theoretically you could take it and harvest it then if you wanted to. Now for us, we wait because I want to wait till the end of the summer for 2 reasons. First of all, I want to make sure that they've collected all the stuff that they can. Plus, I want them to be able to eat whatever they need to eat before I take it. I'd rather them eat the stuff that I was going to take before I harvest it, so that they haven't eaten all the stuff that they're going to need for the winter. Once we pull the hives, the frames, I'll take that up. I got a bunch of friends that come over. I've got a couple friends that are into that now, and we kind of make a day of it. And we pull out all the hives, we decap it. Anyways, a little tool for that. Put it into this kind of centrifuge or whatever, where you turn it and it slings out the honey out of the hives. So I think this year we got probably about 11 gallons is probably, I think, what I harvested this year. Pretty proud of that.
What tastes better, the honey from a grocery store or the honey directly from bees?
Honey doesn't go bad, right? It may crystallize a little bit, but you can warm that up. And my bees, the bees that are natural, are going out and they're collecting everything from 1,000 different types of trees and plants and whatever's available out there. They're bringing it back. Anyway, I'm collecting it and put it right in a jar. So commercially, most of the honey you get were bees that were really located on a particular plant, right? So it's really not getting a whole lot of variety of stuff. It's just getting one type of plant. So that makes the taste profile be much thinner, anyway, and not as broad, not as floral, probably not as tasty in my opinion. And in order for them to process it quick enough, they heat the honey up so that it flows faster, right? And then in the process of doing that, some of the medicinal properties, some of the things that make honey kind of good for you, die. It deactivates that kind of stuff. So at least that's what I read. So I think it doesn't taste as good. It tastes a little flat as far as profile anyway, and it doesn't have the beneficial properties that natural honey would. I think it's really important that people have a hobby, right? I mean, we all work really hard, and from my standpoint, people who work at Webco, I appreciate it. Anyway, I wouldn't be able to live the life I live if it wasn't for 1,300 people working hard every day. But I think having something that you do outside of work that allows you to escape from the stresses of the things that you do from 8 to 5 or 6 to 6, however that is, I think it's really important, right? Whether that's coaching a softball team or coaching a soccer team or keeping bees or gardening, just an opportunity for you to connect with yourself and disconnect from the world, right? And so beekeeping, for me, gives me an opportunity to do just that, right? I get to disconnect from whatever else is going on in the world and connect closer to myself and nature, and something that I think matters. One of my friends who I got into beekeeping, his wife happens to be associated with the Oklahoma Craft Beer Association. And so she was talking to one of the guys that own a brewery here in town, a Broken Arrow Brewing Company, and was telling her that her husband started keeping bees. He said, I would love to make a honey kolsch. We're going to provide the honey. He's going to add that honey into a batch of beer. And so we're going to have our own kolsch. We're going to brew this weekend. It'll be available on November 10th, probably, anyway, at Broken Arrow Brewing Company. So we're trying to we get to name it, we get half the beer that we produce from it, and we get to help make it. So that's all pretty cool, right?
So if there was anybody out there that was like, hey, that sounds pretty neat, I'd like to get into that, what kind of resources could you point them toward?
There's an organization here in our part of the country called Neoba, N-E-O-B-A. They got a website page. There's a club you can join. It's $25 a year anyway. But then every year in the spring, They'll have classes on how to beekeep and how to build your equipment and all the things you need to know. If I ever got any questions, there's a couple people I can call, and I think if you get involved in that club, there's tons and tons of folks out there that would help you for sure, including me.
Well, I want to thank you for taking this time to do this, the talk on Beyond Webco. We'll make sure to add some B-roll into the end.
Be careful, anyway, when you're taking care of bees.